whenever it's ready to go. But I'm not exactly sure what's going on with it, but it is being a little combative this time around. For whatever reason, but anyhow, we'll try to have the recording. It may not even work. I don't know, but hopefully it will. But going anyhow, moving forward. Enough about that. I want to talk about an article that I had recently written for Bellator Christi. I'm submitted it to the Christian Post. I hope it's going to run on the Christian Post here very soon. But that's obviously up to them. But this actually come from a question from a friend on Facebook, asking about a tradition or something she had heard online about some type of a tradition, Jewish tradition related to the resurrection of Jesus, or actually related to mealtime. And it said, according to this tradition, that if you were to eat a meal and you were to toss the napkin aside, it meant that you were finished with the meal. However, if you took the napkin and you folded it neatly and you tucked it over to the side away from the plate, then that would mean that you're not finished, that you're finished for the moment, but you're going to be back to finish the meal. And according to the story circulating online, the story links this tradition to the headcloth of Jesus, which was placed over to the side. John 20, verse 7 in the King James Version says that Peter and John, if the beloved disciple is the writer of the fourth gospel, which I believe it is, so I believe that the Gospel of John was written by the Apostle John. Okay, so whenever he's using the term beloved disciple, he's referring to himself. Quite honestly, and this isn't the topic of conversation today, but quite honestly, I think that's the only thing that fits. Now, I've heard the arguments for other individuals being the author of the fourth gospel, but it really just doesn't hold for me. It doesn't hold the way it would for the Apostle John. And so anyhow, I think quite honestly, quite clearly, in my opinion, John the Apostle is the writer of the fourth gospel. So that would be eyewitness testimony that he's recording there. But anyhow, in the King James Version, they say that Peter and John run to the tomb. John gets there because he's younger, gets there first before Peter. I thought about this just today. Our associate pastor led up a campaign to help a local school to provide a meal for them, and so I was helping him load the stuff there, and he is. I didn't even dawn on me till just today when I was thinking about this that I'm probably old enough to be his dad, because I'm about twice his age, and I was thinking as we were loading that thing, and boy, I was out of breath. And boy, he was able to keep going. And so I can kind of sympathize with Peter here in this instance where John outruns Peter to the tomb. John got there first, and he looked in and he believed. And which is a very interesting concept by looking at the grave cloths that John believed. But anyhow, they investigate the tomb and saw, and I quote, the napkin that was about Jesus' head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. So here again, according to this story online, this Jewish tradition about the mealtime, the folding of the napkin relates to the folding of the napkin that was around Jesus' head, and by folding it neatly, placing it to the side, it was a way of saying that Jesus was going to say that I'm done for now, but I'm coming back. The big question that a friend of mine online, Joy Briggs, asked online, she was asking the question, is there any truth to this story? Is there any evidence that there was a Jewish tradition related to this? And she's asking the question, is there any relevance, is there any pertinence to this story? Does it really hold? And well, I found the story heartwarming, and if it is true, I think it would be very fascinating, and obviously it's something that's been passed around in many churches. I had actually heard of this in a church, a pastor using this in the church once before. But when I began researching this issue, then I began finding things that didn't quite mesh well with this story being circulated online. And I want to give you 3 reasons why I don't think that this story is true. I do think that Jesus wrapping the headcloth to the side, I think that's true. The biblical story is very true. But my problem is more along the lines with this internet story that's being passed along, uh, relating this mealtime tradition, the headcloth of Jesus being placed to the side. There are 3 reasons why I don't think it's associated, but I do think that the historical things behind the story actually presents a more fascinating look at the resurrection event. In fact, something that I had never really considered before investigating this. So let's take a look at the three reasons why I don't think that this story holds, and 3 things that I think we find 3 or 4 reasons, 3 or 4 fascinating details we find about the resurrection actually because of this headcloth. So first and foremost, something that needs to be mentioned is the headcloth was not a napkin. Okay, so the mere association between a mealtime tradition and the resurrection event, which is in a tomb, a burial practice, which he overcame death. Mealtime and the burial practices are really like apples and oranges. They're 2 very different things, and I don't know that there's a correlation that can be met. And this is one of those things, you hear the story and you really don't question it, and you think, yeah, maybe there's something to it. But really, when I started even thinking about the story, the mealtime tradition and the burial tradition, they really don't even go together. To really think about that, they really don't go together. But here's the problem. With all due respect to the King James Version, this is not a knock on the King James Version. I have a lot of friends who are, big fans of the King James. My only problem is the King James only movement. That's where I have issues. But with all due respect to the King James Version, napkin is probably not the best translation of the term used in the original Greek text, which was sodarion. Sodarion indicates a small piece of cloth which could be used as a towel, a napkin, a handkerchief, or a face cloth. A lot of times when I talk to people about Greek and Hebrew terms, and by all means, by no means am I an expert on this. I know enough to be dangerous. Okay, I know enough Hebrew to be dangerous. I can read through some Greek text, more so Greek than Hebrew, but I can read through some texts in Hebrew. I can read through some texts in Greek. After I finish my PhD work, this is an area I hope to beef up a little more after I finish my thing in the PhD program. But sodarion, so in other words, going back to a Greek word can mean different things, a Hebrew word can mean different things, but the same thing happens in language. For instance, you can use the term, I always use this illustration, the term bank. You can use the term bank to refer to a financial institution, or you can use the term bank to refer to a side of a river or something of that sort, or the tilting of an airplane or something of that sort. So even the term bank itself can have several different meanings. Well, the same thing is true with sodarion. You know the meaning of a term many times by the context in which it's used. Sodarion can mean a napkin, can mean a towel, a handkerchief, or a face cloth, or a head wrapping. So when you look at the context of how it's being used, then the only thing that really fits is a head cloth, a head covering. And there actually is, I think, the Sodarium of Aveo, I believe, is thought by many to be this very head cloth that covered Jesus' head. But the Sodarion we see in John's text fits well with the idea of the cloth covered the head of Jesus and was itself laid to the side. The Christian Standard Bible, I think in this case, provides a better translation, as it says, the wrapping that had been on his head was not lying with the linen cloths, but was folded up in a separate place by itself. Now, the whole aspect of it being folded up brings together another question that I have. According to this internet story, the sodarion, the head covering, was wrapped neatly or folded neatly and placed to the side. Well, here's another issue. The headcloth was rolled and not folded. Okay? Now, even the CSB uses the term folded. I think the King James uses the same term as well. But here's the part of the problem. The term into liso, I hoping I'm saying that right, entulizo, seems to fit better with the notion of being rolled. Okay, this action entulizo, according to Lau and Nida, or Nida, indicates the action to cause something to be in the shape of a roll, to roll up something kind of like a scroll. Okay, so the term is used in Revelation 6:14, where the sky is said to entulizo, be rolled up like a scroll. Okay, the neat folding of the headcloth, as implied by the mealtime tradition, even if the tradition is true, even if there is a mealtime tradition, doesn't quite fit the context of this story, because the entulizo action being taken place is not a neat folding as you fold a piece of paper, but it's to roll it up like a scroll, or to circle it together, to roll it up, and then to neatly roll it up and then place it to the side. So this brings a third issue with this internet story. And I'm just going to give a disclaimer here. There are a lot of Jewish traditions. I was listening to Michael Brown's podcast just the other day, and he said something very similar to this, and he's more knowledgeable on Jewish traditions than I am, being that he is a Christian Jewish believer, a Messianic Jewish believer. There is no evidence. So let me go back to what I was saying. There are a lot of Jewish traditions. There are a lot of Jewish traditions, both oral traditions and written traditions. Okay. The death nail to what could be the death nail to this legend, no pun intended, is that there seems to be no evidence that such a Jewish mealtime tradition existed in the first century. Now, there may be something out there, and if you're out there and you know this tradition, you know the reference to this tradition, by all means, shoot me an email. Send me an email, send me a text or something like that, saying, and give me the reference where it can be found. But nothing I found, and I spent quite a bit of time researching this, I found nothing. I found absolutely nothing related to this mealtime tradition. So, again, there may be a tradition out there that I just didn't see, but from what I could tell, there was nothing in no Jewish tradition that I could find that seemed to match this thing that's being proclaimed online. So that would, in all honesty, I think there are other reasons to believe that the correlation does not exist between a mealtime tradition and the wrapping of the headcloth. But even if there were to be a mealtime tradition, that was even if there were to be a mealtime, it wasn't even a mealtime tradition, then the whole story collapses. It loses its foundation. So again, there may be something out there that I've just not seen, that I haven't discovered. And if you know of a tradition, you know this tradition, then by all means, send me an email, let me know, and I'll come on the podcast and give the reference to it, that you see. But don't just say that so told you so. I need the reference. I need the evidence to be able to go on the air and say that that it does exist. So from what I could tell, I didn't see anything. So I do think that this whole story, I don't want to leave you just with a negative and not provide a positive in this case. I do think that the story we find with the rolling of the headcloth actually provides a different perspective on the resurrection event. I think there are three things that just really popped out at me about this whole entire case. First of all, the body was clearly resurrected and not resuscitated. Something miraculous happened for the rolled headcloth to have been placed in a separate location than the other linens. I mean, the body of Jesus wasn't fully embalmed by this time, because due to the Passover scenario, being late in the Passover day, or the Passover getting ready to start, they were able to do all the things that would normally be done to prepare the body for burial. But having said that, Jesus would still have been bound in these different cloths, and so for him to be able to get out of that, I think shows something miraculous happened. I mean, Lazarus, in the case with Lazarus had to be unbound from the cloths that enclosed his body, and we see that in John 11 verses 43 through 44. And it's very funny, I think, because it almost as if Jesus is saying, release him, let him go. If you don't release him, then he's going to die again, and I'm going to have to raise him back from the dead again. If you don't, everybody was there in awe and wonder, looking that this Lazarus who'd been dead 4 days was now alive, and Jesus is saying, hey, listen, You need to get him out of the cloths or he's going to die again. He's going to suffocate again. Get him out of the cloths. So the was able to return to life, to be able to get out of these cloths somehow or another, and be able to take this headcloth and place it to the side is very remarkable, a very remarkable thing, which indicates that something very spectacular happened with the resurrection event, something that is not the norm by any stretch of the imagination. Secondly, the body, it seems like, from the way I understood this Greek text, in looking at the original languages, it seems as if the body would have had to come through the cloths with the head wrapping, which is weird. It's very weird to think about this. It seems like the cloths that had enclosed his body remained in the shape that they were found. So it's like they remained in the shape they were found, but the head cloth, the head covering, came out with Jesus as he must have went through. I kind of envision, if you're on the YouTube channel, like say, one hand is the cloth and one hand is the body, almost as if the body just came through the cloth somehow or another. It suggests a very otherworldly event, a very ethereal event, something where God established a set of physics almost, to link the spiritual and the physical in an amazing new union, and that to me is remarkable. I think just this fact alone is very interesting, very intriguing, showing that this resurrected body is a physical body, but it has a whole new set of characteristics that the body doesn't have. Okay, it's still very physical, but it's kind of another type of physical body, taking the physical body that was there and transforming it into something even grander. And I think that shows evidence, possible evidence that such a thing happened. And thirdly, the body of Jesus was wrapped in more than one cloth. Now, I'm going to, in full disclosure, I do believe, if I were proven to be wrong, then it wouldn't shake my faith, but it would take a remarkable amount of evidence to the contrary to show that it's not. I believe that the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus. The more they study this thing, the more bizarre it becomes. I mean, it seems to be that the markings on the cloth are an X-ray type of marking that most likely came from some type of radiation. There's a paper out there, and I may do a podcast on that sometime, a paper out there that Dr. Habermas gave us, or that he showed us where to find it, that shows the belief and good reasons behind believing that the image on the cloth on the Shroud of Turin are burn marks that were left behind some type of high dose of radiation. The blood stains are AB hemoglobin. It's actual authentic blood stains. So I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, another thing they have definitively proven is that the markings on the shroud, they're not paintings. It's not a painting. They don't know what someone may not know what it is, but they know what it's not. It's definitely not a painting. It has no elements of pigment on there whatsoever as far as any type of painting. I mean, now there'll be shows out there that may try to say to the contrary, but from those who've worked with the shroud, those who've been at ground zero, who've done the heavy lifting in this regard, they will tell you that it is not a painting. Burn marks, very thin too, only a few fibers deep. Very intriguing, and the more they study this thing, the more bizarre it becomes. In fact, so I believe it's Dr. Habermas was saying that, or someone was saying, if it may not have been him, but someone was saying that even around the mouth there you see these little digits, and if you look closely, people have wondered what they are. Well, it's actually an X-ray image of the mouth. In fact, one person took a dentist and showed it to a dentist, and the dentist said, that's the best set of X-rays I've ever seen in my life. So whatever produced this was a power greater than anything we have now to be able to do, much less in the first century. So anyhow, the podcast is not on the Shroud of Turin, but what I have found is that some people will use John's accounts with the different cloths to say, well, the Shroud of Turin must not have been there because they had these other linen wrappings. Well, if there's one thing we can see from John's account, is that there was more than one cloth. Okay, there was the head cloth, and there were these other cloths. Now, did those cloths, did they include a shroud? They may have, or they may not have. John doesn't say. He just basically says the linens that enclosed the body, the linen cloths that enclosed the body, were lying separate in the shape that they were found, and the head covering was wrapped to the side, rolled to the side, and placed next to the linen cloths that had covered his body. So again, there was something very otherworldly that happened here, where Jesus must have come through the linen cloths, and rolled up his head covering to the side. I think that we see what we see from this story is far more remarkable than an urban legend can ever provide. And while this urban legend is not something that necessarily holds, it's not something that is necessarily true, I do think that the rolling of the head covering to the side next to the linen cloths is something that shows the truly remarkable nature of the resurrection event. So, and the wonderful thing is that the power exhibited by the resurrection is greater than any power known to humanity. Paul notes, as Jesus had risen from the dead, so shall all of us who have trusted in Christ be raised from the dead in a body very similar to Jesus's, because that's what it means by Jesus being the first fruits of the resurrection. This indicates that this type of resurrection, as I said in the article, I'll say here as well, this type of resurrection coming to a tomb near you. When Christ returns, the dead in Christ will rise. And whatever event took place on that first Easter Sunday, the same thing will happen to the bodies of those who entrust their lives to Jesus Christ. They will be raised just as he was. That's what it means when it says that he is the first fruits of the resurrection. As he was raised from the dead, so shall we. And beloved, I hope that's a truth that you can take with you this Easter Sunday and every day before and every day past, to remember that just as Jesus was risen, so shall you be risen. This is Brian Chilton, and you've been listening to the Bellator Christi podcast. We'll see you back the next time. Step into the arena of ideas.